Every animal around you has already made a decision about what you are. Before you came within 20 meters, they had already categorized you and prepared a response. That assessment, human equals danger, maintain distance, is not something they learned individually. It was written into their nervous systems across thousands of generations of ancestors that learned, sometimes fatally, what humans do to animals that get too close. But the first animals that ever encountered humans had no such memory, and what they thought of us was something completely different. For most of human evolutionary history, we were not the most dangerous thing on the African savanna. We were not even close. Early humans, small, slow, lacking claws or venom or armor, were categorized by the animal world as medium-sized omnivores, prey for larger carnivores, and modest competition for everything else. A leopard encountering an early human 2 million years ago almost certainly assessed it the same way it assessed any similarly sized prey animal, as a potential meal, not as something to fear. The Tong child, one of the most famous early hominin fossils, shows marks on the skull consistent with a large bird of prey or leopard, confirming that early hominins were actively hunted. The crowned eagle of Africa hunts small primates as a regular part of its diet today, and it was likely hunting our ancestors for millions of years before we became too large and too organized to be easy targets. The critical distinction in what ancient animals thought of humans depends entirely on geography, whether those animals had evolved alongside humans or encountered us for the first time. African animals are the most wary of humans of any animals on Earth because they co-evolved with us across millions of years and learned through hard experience what humans are capable of. African elephants can distinguish between different ethnic groups of humans by smell and visual cues. They have learned which specific types of humans pose a hunting threat and respond accordingly. Now imagine the same landscape in North America approximately 14,000 years ago. The first humans crossing from Asia, encountering animals that had never in their evolutionary history seen anything remotely like a human being. North America before human arrival had more large animal species than Africa has today: woolly mammoths, mastodons, giant ground sloths, American camels, horses, and lions. A giant ground sloth seeing a human for the first time would have had no behavioral framework for what it was looking at: a small, strange-smelling, bipedal creature that nothing in its evolutionary history had told it to fear. Scientists call this ecological naivety, when an animal has no evolutionary experience with a particular predator and therefore has no appropriate fear response. The missing fear response is the fatal one. An animal that does not flee cannot be selected against by a predator, so the naivety persists until a predator arrives that actually exploits it. The woolly mammoth had survived ice ages, continental drift, and every predator the Pleistocene could produce, but it had never encountered a predator that coordinated in groups, used projectile weapons, and could pursue it indefinitely. The mammoth's threat detection system did not contain an entry for humans, and by the time enough mammoths had died to begin adding that entry, there were too few mammoths left to propagate the learning. 35 genera of large animals went extinct in North America within approximately 2,000 years of human arrival, a rate and timing that is extremely difficult to explain without human involvement. The overkill hypothesis, developed by ecologist Paul Martin, proposes that human hunters encountering naive megafauna drove rapid extinctions through unsustainable hunting of animals that had no fear response to prevent being approached. Australia tells the same story even more clearly. The continent had its own extraordinary megafauna: giant wombat-like creatures the size of rhinoceroses, marsupial lions, giant kangaroos. Within approximately 10,000 years of human arrival in Australia 50,000 years ago, over 90% of the continent's large animal species were gone, the most complete megafauna collapse in the archaeological record. The diprotodon, a marsupial the size of a rhinoceros, had no evolutionary reason to fear a small bipedal creature it had never encountered, and approached situations that its African counterparts would have fled from. An African rhinoceros encountering humans shows immediate alarm, because African animals co-evolved with human hunters for millions of years. The diprotodon had no such history. We can still see ecological naivety today, in places like the Galapagos Islands, where animals evolved with no terrestrial predators and humans arrived only recently. Galapagos blue-footed boobies will perform elaborate mating displays with humans standing 1 meter away. Their threat assessment system simply has no entry for bipedal mammals on land. When Darwin visited the Galapagos in 1835, he was struck by the animal's complete fearlessness, noting that he could push birds off branches with his hat and that the animals simply returned to their perches. The moa of New Zealand had evolved on an island with no terrestrial predators for so long that it had lost all fear responses. When Polynesian settlers arrived approximately 700 years ago, the moa simply watched them come. The moa, some species standing over 3 meters tall, was extinct within approximately 100 years of human arrival, representing one of the fastest extinction events ever documented. The dodo of Mauritius became the most famous example of ecological naivety, described by sailors as so fearless that it walked toward humans rather than away from them. Sailors reported being able to simply pick dodos up by hand. The bird had no evolutionary framework for interpreting the approach of a large animal as dangerous and had no instinct to flee. From first European contact to extinction took approximately 65 years. The dodo's fearlessness made it so easy to kill that it left no survivors to propagate a different behavioral response. But ecological naivety was not the only animal response to early humans. In the ecosystems where humans had been present for longer, a different calculation was happening. The cave bear, significantly larger than a modern brown bear, shared the limestone cave systems of Europe with Neanderthals and early Homo sapiens for hundreds of thousands of years. Archaeological evidence shows Neanderthals and cave bears competing directly for the same cave systems, burning and eating bears, while bears occasionally killed and ate Neanderthals. The cave bear's assessment of humans was not static. It evolved as humans became more organized, more armed, and more aggressive in their competition for shelter. Fire was the turning point, the moment when animals that had assessed early humans as manageable competition began genuinely reassessing that conclusion. Before controlled fire, early humans were a modest threat. After controlled fire, they had a capability that no other predator possessed, and the animal world had to update its assessment. Animals that evolved in regions of regular human fire use develop specific behavioral responses to approaching fire, which means some of the fear responses we see in animals today toward humans are actually fire fear responses inherited from ancestors that learned fire meant humans. The European cave lion, significantly larger than any modern lion, initially had no specific fear of humans, but the combination of coordinated group hunting and fire appears to have taught it over generations to avoid human camps. A solitary human without fire was a very different proposition for large predators. The European cave lion, cave bear, and spotted hyena all appear to have regularly preyed on isolated early humans. The archaeological evidence is clear. Spotted hyenas, cave lions, leopards, and cave bears were regularly preying on early humans throughout the Pleistocene. For most of our evolutionary history, large carnivores assessed humans as prey, not as apex predators to be feared, but as a medium-sized, somewhat social primate that required caution but rewarded persistence. The great reversal, from prey to apex predator, occurred somewhere between 100,000 and 40,000 years ago, and it was apparently rapid enough to leave the animal world struggling to update its assessment in real time. African animals had the longest time to update their assessment of humans, millions of years of coevolution in which each new human capability produced a corresponding behavioral update in the animals sharing the landscape. African elephants distinguish between different human ethnic groups using smell and visual cues, showing significantly more fear of Maasai men, who have a history of hunting elephants, than of other ethnic groups from the same region. This discrimination was learned and transmitted culturally through elephant herds, the most precise documented example of animal populations maintaining nuanced assessments of specific human groups. What did a mammoth actually perceive when a group of humans approached across the Pleistocene steppe? The mammoth sensory systems were sophisticated. It would have detected their smell, heard their vocalizations, seen their coordinated movement, but had no threat template to match it to, and no behavioral protocol for this specific type of encounter. The giant ground sloth, weighing up to 4,000 kilograms, probably assessed the approaching group of humans as a minor nuisance rather than a meaningful threat. The size disparity alone would have suggested that conclusion. The moment the giant ground sloth registered a wound from a thrown spear, it would have experienced something its evolutionary history had never prepared it for, a threat that did not fit the category of any known predator. The American horse survived every major climate event of the Pleistocene, the ice ages, the warming periods, the habitat changes, and then vanished within centuries of humans arriving in the Americas. The thing that finally killed the American horse after surviving millions of years of environmental challenges was a small bipedal animal it had never encountered before and had no evolved fear response to. Animals encountering early humans for the first time would have been processing a complex, unfamiliar smell, a primate scent combined with smoke, blood, animal fat, and plant materials that added up to nothing in their existing odor library. Studies presenting human scent to animals from different evolutionary backgrounds show the same pattern as visual responses. Animals with long coevolutionary histories show strong alarm. Animals from recently contacted populations show mild curiosity or indifference. The coordinated sounds of human hunters, organized vocalizations, percussion, driving calls, had no equivalent in the natural world, and animals encountering it for the first time had no behavioral protocol for what it meant. Antarctic penguins approach noisy human researchers with curiosity, while African elephants show immediate alarm to recorded human voices played from a speaker hidden in a bush. The sound of a human voice produces opposite behavioral responses in penguins and elephants. One approaches, one flees, and the only variable is whether their ancestors learned what that sound preceded. The animals that survived the arrival of modern humans in large numbers were, overwhelmingly, the ones that had already spent long periods co-evolving with human hunters and had already updated their threat assessments. When you sort ancient megafauna extinctions by evolutionary history with humans, the pattern is clear. The more time an animal's lineage had spent alongside human hunters, the better its chances of surviving the encounter with modern humans. The African buffalo, responsible for more human deaths in Africa than any other large animal, is not coincidentally one of the most experienced large mammals in the world at coexisting with human hunters. The most sophisticated animal assessments of humans, individual recognition, context-dependent responses, transmitted cultural knowledge about specific human groups, are found exclusively in species with the longest coevolutionary histories alongside human hunters. Walk through the ancient world 2 million years ago, and you would have been simultaneously prey for some animals, competition for others, and completely beneath the notice of others, depending entirely on where in the world you were. The transition from prey item to global apex predator happened faster than any equivalent status change in the history of vertebrate life on Earth. Every animal around you today maintains a specific flight initiation distance from humans, and that distance is a direct measurement of how many generations their ancestors spent learning what humans do to animals that get too close. The mammoth looking at the approaching human group with mild curiosity rather than alarm was not being stupid, it was being exactly what evolution had made it. It had simply never been given the information it needed to survive the encounter, and by the time that information existed, there were no mammoths left to receive it. The world that ancient animals thought of humans created the world we live in now, shaped by the extinctions of the naive, the survival of the wary, and the permanent lesson that the ones who are still here have never forgotten. It looked at us with curiosity. It never looked at anything again.